Grab your iced coffees, beauties, and put your phones on D&D. Because today's story is not just a masterclass in taking out the trash. It is a literal, supernatural repossession of a woman's time, money, and sanity. This is a story about the absolute, devastating power of financial clarity and emotional detachment. When you stop being a man's life support, you get to watch gravity do its job. Let's get into the wreckage. The crisp edge of the discharge papers bit into my palm. For 10 years, I had poured every cent of my family's trust fund, every waking hour, and every ounce of my sanity into keeping Julian Sterling alive. Today, his oncologist had finally declared him cancer-free. I had walked toward his VIP suite feeling as though a decade-long storm had finally passed. Then, I heard the voice through the slightly ajar door, and upon my passing, the entirety of my estate, including all remaining liquid assets and properties, shall be transferred to Serena Fairchild and our son, Leo. Julian's voice. Strong, resonant, completely devoid of the frailty he had weaponized against me for a decade. I froze. The sterile scent of the hospital corridor suddenly felt suffocating. Through the narrow crack, I saw them. Serena, her delicate features twisted into a mask of practiced sorrow, leaned into my husband's chest. A boy, roughly 15, stood beside the bed, clutching Julian's hand. My husband, another woman, their teenage son. A phantom pain gnawed at my chest, a cruel reminder of the miscarriages I had endured alone. While managing his crumbling startup, while he was supposedly too weak to handle the stress. He had always told me our love was enough, that children were just an accessory. Now, staring at his secret family, the veil of his deceit was brutally ripped away. I didn't burst into tears. I didn't scream. After 10 years of being a saintly martyr, the betrayal burned away my sorrow, leaving only a frigid, crystalline fury. I closed my eyes and summoned the entity that had bound me to this nightmare 10 years ago. Guide. I called out in my mind, my mental voice eerily calm. If I terminate the karmic pact right now, what is the penalty? A decade ago, desperate to save the man I thought was my soulmate, I had agreed to a supernatural bargain, my luck, my vitality, in exchange for his life, contingent on his unwavering love. The guide's voice, carrying a faint, static, laced hum, echoed in my head. It sounded almost bored. I suppose I forgot to mention the fine print. Clara, if the pact fails because the target is incapable of genuine love, you aren't the one who gets terminated. My breath hitched. What? Julian is the one who will be erased, the guide drawled, a hint of dark amusement in the synthetic tone. His borrowed time expires without your tether. Let's see, your 15th wedding anniversary is in exactly 5 days. He has until then. 5 days. I pushed the door open. It swung silently on its heavy hinges. Serena practically jumped out of Julian's arms, her hands fluttering in an exaggerated display of panic as she pulled her teenage son close to her side. I smoothed my expression into a placid mask and offered a polite, hollow smile. Why the tears, Miss Fairchild? I shifted my gaze to Julian. He was sitting up against the pillows, his broad shoulders instantly stiffening. A microscopic tremor crossed his jawline, the undeniable tell of a cornered coward. Julian, I said, my voice smooth as glass. What on earth did you do to upset your guest? His eyes darted everywhere, but my face. He cleared his throat, the guilt practically suffocating him. Instead of answering, he deflected, his tone lacing with sudden, defensive annoyance. Why didn't you knock, Clara? You shouldn't just barge in here. Before I could dissect his audacity, The teenager pointed a trembling, angry finger at me. "Who are you? Why are you interrupting my dad's recovery?" Serena's face drained of color. She shot Julian a terrified look, playing the fragile victim with Oscar, worthy precision. Julian's mask slipped entirely. Pure panic flashed in his eyes before he forced a strained, condescending chuckle. "Clara, please don't misunderstand. You know how kids are, wild imaginations." My fingernails dug into my palms. Wild imagination. We had been married for 15 years. For a decade, he had drained my youth and my family's wealth, all while raising a son with his college sweetheart. "Of course," I replied, my voice dangerously soft. I looked at the boy, letting a heavy layer of mock pity coat my words. It must be terribly hard for a child to grow up without knowing who his real father is. The confusion makes sense. Serena's jaw tightened. A flash of pure venom cut through her tearful facade, her hands gripping the boy's shoulders a little too hard. "Julian's discharge is processed," she snapped, dropping the sweet girl act for a fraction of a second. "He can finally go home. I'll leave you to your packing then," I said, dropping the medical file onto the foot of the bed. I didn't wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't go far. I stood just outside, pressing my back against the cold wall. The silence of the hallway amplified the voices inside. "Serena, please." Julian's voice drifted out, dripping with honeyed regret. "You and Leo have suffered so much in the shadows. If Clara wasn't controlling the finances so tightly, I would have given you the world by now." "I don't care about the estate, Julian," Serena sobbed, a masterful performance. "I just want us to be a family, but she has done so much for your treatment. I feel so guilty." "She was a necessity," Julian said, his tone turning chillingly pragmatic. "She kept the board happy and the medical bills paid. But you are my true love. Just bear with it a little longer." "I just want my dad," the boy chimed in, perfectly on cue, listening to them, a bitter laugh caught in my throat. I had spent 15 years putting Julian on a pedestal. When he lost his startup, I pawned my mother's jewelry. When he was given a 30% survival rate, I slept in hospital chairs until my spine ached. I was a lifeline, a bank account, a convenient shield. I didn't feel heartbroken anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of absolute disgust guide. I whispered internally, walking down the sterile corridor, my heels clicking like a metronome, counting down to an execution. "Confirm it." Confirmed. "Clara," the guide hummed in my mind. 5 days until total system termination for Julian Sterling. I didn't pick him up the next day. I let my phone ring out on the mahogany dining table as I sat in the darkened living room of our sprawling penthouse. The food I had ordered from his favorite Michelin-starred restaurant sat cold and congealing on the china. At 11 o'clock at night, the front door finally clicked open. Julian stumbled in, the heavy scent of expensive scotch mingling with a sickeningly sweet floral perfume that certainly didn't belong to me. He paused, squinting into the darkness before spotting me sitting rigidly in the armchair. "Clara," he murmured, weaving slightly as he approached. He tried to wrap his arms around me from behind, his lips brushing my neck. "Why are you sitting in the dark, darling?" I sat perfectly still, my skin crawling at his touch. Every instinct screamed at me to shove him away, to scrub his presence off me with bleach. Instead, I turned my head just enough to catch his eye. "Where were you, Julian?" I asked, my tone deadpan. He hesitated. The muscles in his arms tensed before he forced a smooth, practiced sigh. "I told you, darling. The board insisted on an impromptu celebration dinner for my recovery. You know how it is, just endless business talk." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had once worshipped was nothing but a hollow shell of deceit, reeking of another woman's bed, lying straight to my face while standing in the home my money had paid for. "Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the dark like a blade. "Do you ever worry that lying so much might actually kill you?" He froze, the color draining from his face as he stared at me, entirely unaware that the clock in the shadows wasn't just ticking toward midnight. It was ticking down to his grave. For the next 3 days, Julian played a dangerous game of hide and seek, practically living out of his suitcase. He claimed his startup's board of directors was keeping him hostage with back strategy meetings. I didn't bother calling to check. I didn't have to. Serena was giving me front row tickets to his betrayal. She posted relentlessly on her public social media accounts, making sure I wasn't blocked. A photo of Julian's distinct, heavy gold watch resting next to her coffee cup. A video of Julian patting Leo's shoulder at a private sports clinic, the caption reading, "The man of our house, always putting his boy first." A year ago, seeing those posts would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and agony. I would have wondered what I did wrong, why my sacrifices weren't enough. Now, sitting in the quiet luxury of my study, I simply took screenshots of every single post. On the evening of the 4th day, the eve of his expiration, I returned to the penthouse early. The moment the private elevator doors parted, I knew the sanctuary of my home had been the scent of cheap, overpowering vanilla perfume, hung thick in the foyer. A trail of clothes led down the hallway. Julian's custom, tailored suit jacket, a silk tie I had bought him for Christmas, and a scrap of black lace that certainly didn't belong to me. On the kitchen island sat a half-empty bottle of my vintage Opus One. I walked toward the master bedroom, my footsteps silenced by the plush Persian rug. The heavy oak door was pushed open just a fraction. "Julian," Serena's breathless voice drifted through the gap. "Do you like me in this? I know it is Clara's robe, but it was just so soft, I couldn't resist." "You make it look incredibly cheap, darling," Julian murmured, his voice thick with a lazy post-coital satisfaction. "But in the best way possible, come here." "I feel so terrible," Serena whined, the fake guilt practically dripping from the ceiling. "If she knew we were in her bed, she'd be devastated. We're so bad." "She won't know," Julian replied smoothly. "She is probably still at the office, crunching numbers. So I don't have to. Relax, Serena. She is oblivious." I stood there, staring at the sliver of light spilling onto the hallway floor. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. "Fascinating," the guide's synthetic voice hummed in my mind. "Target's biometric data indicates a brief, fleeting spike of guilt. Would you like me to analyze it?" "Don't bother," I replied internally, a cold smirk touching my lips. "It's not guilt. It's just the parasitic fear of losing his host. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I simply turned around and walked into the guest bedroom, closing the door quietly behind me. An hour later, I heard the front door click shut. The parasite had been dismissed. I stepped out of the guest room to find Julian in the living room, hastily tossing Serena's discarded clothing into a duffel bag. He froze when he saw me standing in the hallway. "Clara!" he gasped, his heart rate visibly jumping against his throat. He dropped the bag, his hands twitching before he forced them into his pockets. I thought you were working late. When did you get back?" "A while ago," I said flatly. He swallowed hard, stepping toward me with that practiced remorseful puppy dog look he had perfected over 10 years of illness. "Clara, about the other day at the hospital. I've been feeling terrible. I just needed some space to clear my head." I took a deliberate step back as he reached for me. My eyes locked onto the angry purple bruise blooming on his collarbone, just above the collar of his half-buttoned shirt. Did the board meeting involve a lot of teeth, Julian? His hand dropped. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen grey. Clara, it is not what you think. Let me explain. Save it, I interrupted, walking past him toward the kitchen. I picked up the laundry basket sitting by the washing machine. Inside, crumpled and stained, was my silk robe. I picked it up with 2 fingers, walked over to the trash chute, and dropped it in. Julian watched, completely paralyzed. Clara, do you remember our wedding day, Julian? I asked, leaning against the marble counter. Do you remember when your frat brothers cornered me by the ice sculpture? They laughed and called me a sterile workhorse. They said I was just a walking ATM, buying my way into your elite circle, and that it was a blessing. I couldn't have kids, so I wouldn't pollute your bloodline. Julian flinched. His eyes darted nervously around the room. Why are you bringing that up? That was 15 years ago. They were drunk. I am bringing it up because you stood right behind them, holding a glass of champagne, and you didn't say a single word. I tilted my head, studying his panicked micro-expressions, the twitch of his left eye, the rapid pulse in his neck. Tell me the truth, Julian, just once. Do you actually love me? Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Of course I love you, he finally blurted out. The lie so rehearsed, it sounded like a reflex. The passion, it changes over 15 years, Clara, especially with the cancer. But you are my family. You are the most important person in my life. Family, the word he used when he needed someone to pay the mortgage. I gave him a slow, empty smile. Go to sleep, Julian. He didn't sleep in the master bedroom that night. He sat in the living room chair until dawn, jumping at every shadow, murmuring my name whenever he drifted off. The next morning, day 5, he was a flurry of nervous energy. He was up early, brewing my favorite coffee, trying to play the perfect, attentive husband. Clara, he said cautiously as I walked into the kitchen, dressed in a sharp slate grey power suit. He gestured nervously toward the hallway. Why are there moving boxes packed with my study files and clothes? I picked up my espresso, taking a slow sip. Out with the old, I said casually. The fabric was rotting. It was time for a permanent replacement. I didn't wait for him to decipher the double meaning. I grabbed my briefcase and walked out the door for the very last time. My office, perched high above the financial district, offered a panoramic view of the city. I sat at my mahogany desk, ignoring the spreadsheets glowing on my monitors. I just watched the clock on the wall. Final countdown initiated. The guide's voice echoed, crisp and clinical. 2 o'clock passed, then 2:30. My heart didn't race. My palms weren't sweaty. I felt an eerie, profound peace. The kind of peace you feel when a tumor is finally excised from your body. 3, 2, 1. System terminated. At exactly 2:40 p.m., the landline on my desk began to ring. It was a jarring, shrill sound. I picked up the receiver. Clara Sterling speaking. Mrs. Sterling, a heavy, somber voice came through the line. This is Officer Davis with the NYPD. I am calling regarding your husband, Julian Sterling. I am so incredibly sorry, ma'am. There has been a severe collision on the FDR Drive. He was speeding. He didn't make it. I stared out the floor, to ceiling windows, watching a distant helicopter cut through the smog over the East River. I see, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Thank you for letting me know, officer. Where should I send my representatives? I hung up the phone. Contract fulfilled. Clara, the guide announced. The anomaly has been erased. Your tether is completely severed. Enjoy your life. The presence in my mind vanished. leaving behind a pristine, echoing silence. It was over. The 20-year nightmare of chasing his approval, of bleeding myself dry for a man who despised me, was finally over. Julian Sterling was dead. But as I pulled a bottle of vintage champagne from my private mini fridge and poured myself a glass, a cold smile spread across my face. The death was only the appetizer. Julian had left a will, carefully orchestrated behind my back, leaving everything to his mistress and his bastard son. And knowing Serena, she wouldn't even wait for his body to grow cold before coming to claim her crown. I took a slow sip of the champagne, the bubbles sharp and icy against my tongue. Let her come, I thought, pulling up my bank's forensic accounting files on my monitor. Let her try. Julian's memorial service was a masterclass in East Coast hypocrisy. Held in the mahogany, paneled parlor of our exclusive country club, the room smelled of suffocatingly expensive white lilies and whispered gossip. Cellos hummed a mournful dirge in the background, providing the perfect soundtrack for Manhattan's elite to sip their scotch and feign sorrow over a man they secretly considered a mediocre opportunist. I stood near the grand marble hearth, dressed in a simple black sheath dress, accepting the endless stream of condolences with a perfectly calibrated nod. My eyes were dry. My posture was impeccable. Inside, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. Then, the heavy oak doors of the parlor burst open. The low hum of conversation snapped into a jagged silence. Serena marched into the room, dragging Leo by the wrist. She hadn't bothered to wear black. Instead, she wore a tailored beige trench coat, clutching a thick manila envelope to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were red, rimmed, searching the crowd until they locked onto me. "Clara!" she cried out, her voice engineered to carry across the vaulted ceiling. "How could you? How could you freeze the accounts when Julian's body is barely cold?" The collective breath of 50 wealthy socialites hitched. This was the kind of scandal they usually had to pay to see. I didn't move. I simply set my crystal glass on a passing waiter's tray and folded my hands. "Serena, this is a private memorial you are trespassing." "I have every right to be here," she shrieked, marching right up to the hearth. Leo stood beside her, puffing out his chest, trying to look intimidating, despite his trembling lip. Serena thrust the envelope toward me. "Julian left everything to us. I have the will right here. He drafted it in the hospital. You have no right to hoard his estate from his true family." The whispers erupted around us like a swarm of locusts. True family. A will. I looked at the trembling parchment in her hand. The sheer, unadulterated greed radiating from her pores was palpable. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here to collect her payout. I reached out and took the document from her shaking fingers. I didn't even bother to read it. I simply turned and dropped it directly into the roaring flames of the fireplace behind me. Can we just take a collective breath to savor the sheer, unadulterated boss energy radiating from this single moment? Serena, the mistress, practically kicks down the doors of a high society memorial service, wearing a beige trench coat, which is already a crime against fashion, clutching a will like it's a winning lottery ticket. She's banking on the classic, other woman fantasy, the wealthy tech. Bro husband is going to leave his cold, sterile wife to shower his true love with millions. But Clara doesn't argue. She doesn't cry in front of the Manhattan elite. She just drops the document into a roaring fire because she knows something Serena doesn't. Julian was broke. This right here is why I am constantly screaming at you ladies to know your finances. Julian was cosplaying as a self-made Silicon Valley god, but his entire existence was funded by Clara's trust fund. The absolute audacity of a man writing a will to give away money he does not own is staggering. But it is a delusion we see all the time. Men like Julian view their wives' assets as their own divine right, while viewing the wife herself as an annoying administrative fee. When Clara drops that forensic accounting ledger on the table, she isn't just exposing the affair, she is executing a flawless financial checkmate. She didn't just deny Serena an inheritance, she handed her an itemized bill for a decade of stolen funds. There is no revenge more devastating than looking at the woman who stole your husband and saying, "Congratulations, you get the man. Now, pay his tab, it's 0-calorie, high-protein vengeance, and I am obsessed." "What are you doing?" Serena screamed, lunging forward, her hands grasping at the empty air as the fire swallowed the paper in a flash of bright orange. Leo cursed, trying to step past me, but a security guard instantly materialized, blocking their path. "Are you insane?" Serena shrieked, her carefully constructed victim persona completely shattering. "That was a legal document. You can't just burn it." "It doesn't matter if I burn it, frame it, or eat it, Serena," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough authority to silence the entire room. "It's completely worthless." Her face went pale, the muscles in her jaw twitching violently. "You are lying," Julian said. "Julian lied," I interrupted, stepping closer until I could see my own cold reflection in her terrified pupils. "He drafted a will leaving you all of his assets." "The problem, Serena, is that Julian didn't have any assets." She let out a choked, dismissive laugh. "He owned a tech company. He was a CEO. He was a figurehead of a bankrupt startup that I kept afloat with my family's trust," I corrected her, watching the exact moment the delusion began to crack behind her eyes. "He didn't sign a prenup, and he never legally separated his finances from mine. Every single medical bill, every luxury car, every piece of designer clothing he bought over the last 15 years came out of my accounts." My lawyer, Arthur, stepped seamlessly from the crowd, handing me a thick, leather-bound ledger. I dropped it onto the small cocktail table between us with a heavy, definitive thud. "They searched forensic accounting records," I said, tapping the leather cover. "They detail the millions of dollars Julian funneled to you over the last decade, rent for your townhouse, private school tuition for your son, your vacations, since that money was marital property, spent on a mistress without my consent. The law considers it a dissipation of assets." Serena staggered backward, as if I had physically struck her. Leo grabbed her arm to keep her upright, his teenage bravado evaporating into pure confusion. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that you aren't inheriting a fortune." "Serena," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "You're inheriting a debt. I want every single dime my husband spent on you returned to my accounts. If you don't liquidate whatever you have left and pay me back within 30 days, I will sue you into oblivion. You won't just be broke, you'll be buried." Serena's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking haggard and old. The murmurs from the crowd were no longer shocked. They were venomous. A mistress, living off Clara's money, how pathetic. She has the nerve to show up here, looking for a payout. The judgment of New York's upper crust is a physical weight. Serena felt it crushing her. Stripped of Julian's protection and exposed as a parasite, her fake tears dried up instantly, replaced by the raw, animalistic panic of a woman who had just lost her meal ticket and her future in one breath. She grabbed Leo's arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket, and practically dragged him out of the parlor, fleeing the suffocating whispers and my unwavering gaze. He turned back to the crowd, offering a polite, regretful smile. "My apologies for the interruption. Please, enjoy the catering." 1 year later, The Caribbean sun was a warm, heavy blanket over my skin. I was lying on a private cabana bed in St. Bart's, a half-empty margarita resting on the teak side table. My life had become unrecognizable. I had handed my investments to a ruthless asset manager and spent the last 12 months traveling the globe, reclaiming the youth Julian had stolen from me. Serena had vanished shortly after the lawsuit was filed, fleeing the country with her son to avoid the crushing debt. I didn't care where they went, as long as they were rotting in obscurity. I closed my eyes behind my sunglasses, letting the sound of the crashing waves lull me into a state of absolute bliss. Then, a familiar, static, laced voice hummed in the back of my mind. Long time, no see, Clara. I didn't open my eyes. I just smiled lazily. Where have you been, guide? Did the system put you on sabbatical? Something like that, the guide replied, though the synthetic drawl sounded less bored and more intrigued. I am afraid there has been an anomaly in your completed contract. My smile faded. I sat up, pushing my sunglasses up into my hair. What anomaly? Julian is dead. His ashes are scattered. He was, the guide corrected smoothly. But the target became self-aware post-termination. He realized the nature of the karmic pact, and he made a new bargain. I stared at the pristine turquoise water, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What kind of bargain? He traded the freedom of his next life for a chance to restart this one, the guide explained. He has been resurrected. His new objective is to make you fall in love with him again. I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Are you out of your mind? You resurrected my cheating, parasitic husband. Do I get terminated if he fails? Oh, absolutely not. The guide chuckled, the sound dripping with dark amusement. Our head developer is a woman. She strictly punishes unfaithful men. If he fails to win your genuine love, he will simply be erased again, painfully. But I thought you should know. He didn't just come back. What do you mean? I mean he's already here. The system went dead. Total silence. Suddenly, a shadow fell over my cabana, blocking out the Caribbean sun. I slowly turned my head, standing at the edge of the wooden deck, dripping wet from the ocean and looking exactly as he had a decade ago, before the cancer, before the lies. Before the bitter end was Julian. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with desperate, frantic tears. He took a trembling step forward, looking at me like a starving man staring at a feast. Clara, he whispered, his voice cracking with a horrifying, obsessive devotion. I finally understand. I know everything, and I swear to you, I am going to win you back. The Caribbean breeze suddenly felt icy. I stared at the man standing at the edge of my private deck. Water dripped from Julian's clothes, pooling on the expensive teakwood. He looked exactly like he had before the cancer stripped him to bone and bile strong jaw. Thick hair, the picture of a Silicon Valley golden boy. But his eyes were entirely different. The arrogant spark was gone, replaced by a frenzied, hollow desperation. Win me back. I repeated the words slowly, rolling them around in my mouth like a bad oyster. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop my margarita. I just looked at him with the sterile curiosity of a scientist, observing a cockroach that had somehow survived a nuclear blast. Are you out of your mind? Or did the afterlife scramble your cognitive functions? Julian flinched as if I had slapped him. He took another step forward, his hands raised in surrender. Clara, please. You have to listen to me. When I died in that crash, when the darkness took me, I saw the truth. I saw the karmic pact. I saw you draining your own life force for 10 years just to keep me breathing. His voice broke. A pathetic, wet sound. He fell to his knees on the wooden deck, ignoring the expensive linen trousers soaking up the puddle of seawater. I was blind, Clara. Serena manipulated me. She played on my vanity, my sickness. But death stripped all that away. I know you are the only one who ever truly loved me. I traded my next life just to come back to you. We can start over." I let out a low, humorless laugh. The sound cut through the sound of the crashing waves. "Julian," I said, leaning forward on my lounge chair, my voice laced with absolute venom. 20 years of being alive couldn't give you basic human decency. What makes you think dying fixed your brain?" His jaw clenched. The muscles in his neck strained as he tried to process my total lack of empathy. "Clara, I am bearing my soul to you. I crossed the boundary of death for you. You crossed the boundary of death because you are a narcissist who couldn't handle losing." I corrected him sharply, watching the veins throb at his temples. "You don't love me. You love the fact that I was your safety net. And now that you are standing here, with nothing but wet clothes and a borrowed life, you want your ATM back." "That is not true," he roared, lunging forward to grab my hand. He never made it. A hand tanned and sculpted from marble clamped onto Julian's shoulder with the force of a hydraulic press. "I believe the lady said she isn't interested." A smooth, baritone voice purred. I looked up. Silas stood there, holding 2 fresh, frost-beaded glasses of champagne. He was 30 years old, possessing the kind of devastating, sharp-jawed beauty that made people stop breathing when he walked into a room. I had met him a few months ago in Monaco. He was a self-made billionaire with a mysterious background. But more importantly, he looked at me like I was the center of his universe. Silas effortlessly shoved Julian backward. Julian stumbled, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet wood, and landed hard on his backside. "Darling," Silas said, seamlessly handing me a flute of champagne, before sitting on the edge of my lounger. His hand rested casually, possessively, on my bare thigh. "Is the local wildlife bothering you?" Julian stared at Silas. I watched his gaze dart from Silas's perfectly tailored resort wear to the casually intimate way his hand rested on my leg. The micro-expressions on Julian's face were a symphony of defeat. His pupils dilated, his lips parted in a silent gasp, and the color completely drained from his face. The realization that he had been replaced, and by a man vastly superior in every conceivable metric, was a visible, physical blow. "Who the hell are you?" Julian snarled, scrambling to his feet, his chest heaving. "I am the man drinking champagne with the woman you were stupid enough to let go," Silas replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He radiated a quiet, dangerous authority. Though, legally speaking, her marital status is a widow. "So tell me, who are you supposed to be? A very confused corpse?" Julian's eyes locked onto my neck. I knew what he was looking at. Just below my collarbone was a faint, purple bruise. A lingering testament to the very active, very satisfying night Silas and I had just shared. Something in Julian snapped. The illusion of his romantic redemption shattered, revealing the same possessive, entitled monster he had always been. "She is my wife," Julian bellowed, his face contorting into a mask of ugly rage. He lunged at Silas, his fist pulled back. Silas didn't even spill his champagne. He simply sidestepped, hooked a foot behind Julian's ankle, and shoved his shoulder. Julian crashed face, first into the sand beside the deck, spitting grit and seawater. Within seconds, 2 burly resort security guards, who Silas had undoubtedly signaled, were dragging Julian up by his armpits. "Get your hands off me!" Julian thrashed wildly, his eyes wide and bloodshot as he stared at me. "Clara, tell them! I am your husband. I came back for you." "I don't know this man," I said coldly to the guards, taking a slow sip of my champagne. "Please remove him from the premises. He is ruining my view." As Julian's frantic screams faded down the beach, Silas leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my temple. "Are you all right, Clara?" "I am perfectly fine," I murmured, leaning into his touch. "But I think the ocean air is giving me a headache. Let's take a walk into town." The cobblestone streets of Gustavia were lined with high-end boutiques and pristine outdoor cafes. Silas walked beside me, our fingers interlaced. His presence was a grounding weight against the surreal absurdity of seeing my dead husband. As we passed a small, discreet medical clinic tucked between a designer sunglass store and a bakery, a sharp nasal voice cut through the ambient noise. "I told you, I need the cash advance. I am an American citizen. I am healthy. Just take the blood." I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing near the clinic's rear entrance was Serena. The past year had stripped away every ounce of her polished upper-middle class veneer. Her hair was greasy and pulled into a messy knot. She wore an oversized stained t-shirt, and her face was puffy, the unmistakable side effect of participating in unregulated, black, market clinical trials just to survive. I pulled Silas behind the shade of a large bougainvillea bush, watching the scene unfold with grim satisfaction. "Madame, please leave, or I will call the gendarmerie," the clinic nurse said, waving her away in broken English. Serena cursed viciously, kicking a trash can before slumping against the brick wall. She looked feral, desperate, a parasite that had been starved of a host for entirely too long. And then fate delivered the punchline. Stumbling down the other end of the alleyway, nursing a bloody lip and brushing sand off his ruined trousers, was Julian. He had been thrown out of the resort and was wandering aimlessly, his eyes scanning the streets, likely still looking for me. He didn't see Serena at first, but Serena saw him. Her head snapped up. Her bloodshot eyes widened, practically bulging out of her skull. She stared at the man whose death had left her drowning in debt. The man who was supposed to be a pile of ash in a New York cemetery. I watched Serena's micro. Expressions shift from absolute terror to disbelief, and finally to a manic, predatory glee. She didn't care about the physics of his resurrection. She only saw her walking, talking ATM. Julian paused, sensing eyes on him. He turned his head and locked eyes with the mistress he had sacrificed everything for. The mistress he now blamed for ruining his life. Julian's face twisted in pure revulsion. He took a step back, ready to run, but Serena was already moving. "Julian!" she shrieked, launching herself down the alleyway like a starving hyena spotting fresh meat. I stepped out from behind the flowers, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face as I watched the collision. Let the games begin. The cobblestone alleyway echoed with Serena's shrill, disbelieving shriek. I didn't stick around to watch the initial collision. Seeing two parasites fight over scraps in the shadows wasn't enough for me. I wanted a public execution. I turned to Silas, who was watching the scene with a cool, calculated amusement. "Silas," I murmured, my voice smooth and lethal, "do you still have those contacts in the tech media? The ones who covered Julian's sudden demise?" Silas's lips curved into a devastating predatory smile. He pulled a sleek phone from his pocket. "For you, Clara. I could have the attention of the entire Eastern Seaboard in 5 minutes. What's the play?" "Send a mass anonymous tip," I instructed, my mind already 10 steps ahead. "Tell them the late, disgraced CEO Julian Sterling faked his death to evade his creditors, and he's currently hiding out in St. Bart's. And Silas, make sure the live stream link is attached." 2 hours later, the trap was set. I was seated at the premier terrace table of Eden Rock, the island's most exclusive cliffside restaurant, wearing a simple white sundress. The ocean breeze was perfect, but the atmosphere around our table, was crackling with engineered tension. Propped up discreetly behind a centerpiece of orchids was Silas's secondary phone, its camera lens capturing the entire terrace, currently broadcasting to a rapidly multiplying audience of thousands back in the States. I had sent Julian a single vague text from an unlisted number. "If you want to prove you've changed, meet me at Eden Rock, noon simultaneously." Silas had ensured a local hotel concierge dropped a very loud gossip hint within earshot of Serena about Julian's whereabouts, casually mentioning the millions he had stashed in offshore accounts. At exactly 12:05 p.m., Julian burst onto the terrace. He was breathing heavily, his hair disheveled, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked frantically around the dining patio until his bloodshot eyes locked onto me. A wave of pathetic, desperate relief washed over his face. He practically shoved a waiter aside to get to my table, completely ignoring Silas, who sat back with a glass of scotch, watching the show. "Clara," Julian gasped, slamming his hands down on the linen tablecloth. His knuckles were white. "You texted. You gave me a chance, I told you. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." "Sit down, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You are making a scene." He collapsed into the chair opposite me, swallowing hard. The micro-expressions of his panic were mesmerizing. The rapid flutter of his eyelids, the way he kept licking his dry lips. He was terrified of losing his grip on his only lifeline. "I don't care about a scene," he lied smoothly, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I pulled it back instantly, letting his fingers grasp empty air. "I only care about you, that woman. Serena. I just saw her in town. She makes my skin crawl. Clara, I swear. I have nothing to do with her anymore. She was a mistake. Target's heart rate is elevated. He is lying." The guide's voice hummed faintly in my mind. "I know," I replied mentally. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant terrace flew open. "Julian Sterling, you cowardly bastard." The entire patio fell dead silent. Diners lowered their forks. Waiters froze. Serena marched onto the sunlit terrace, pulling Leo by the arm. The contrast between the elite, moneyed guests and Serena's ragged, unhinged appearance was jarring. She looked like a feral animal cornered in a palace. Her puffy face was contorted in absolute rage, her eyes darting between Julian and me. Julian's face went completely ashen, the blood drained from his lips so fast he looked like a corpse. "Serena, get the hell out of here," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Get out," Serena shrieked, marching right up to our table. She slammed her fists down right next to Julian's. "You faked your death. You left us with millions in debt, that bitch." She pointed a trembling, jagged fingernail at me. "Took everything because of you. And now you are here, begging her for money while your own son is starving." "Shut your mouth!" Julian roared, leaping to his feet. He looked frantically at me, his eyes wide with sheer panic, terrified that I would think he orchestrated this. "Clara, I swear to God, I didn't invite her. She is a stalker. She is crazy." "Don't you call my mother crazy," Leo interjected, stepping up. The teenager's face was red, warped by years of entitlement that had suddenly been ripped away. He glared at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. "This is all your fault. You are just a barren, ugly homewrecker. If you hadn't stolen my dad's money, we wouldn't be here. You are a fake wife." The silence on the terrace was deafening. The only sound was the crashing of the waves below. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I simply looked at Julian, raising a single questioning eyebrow. Julian looked at my indifferent face, and his fragile, performative sanity completely snapped. The realization that this teenager was actively destroying his last chance at financial and social salvation pushed him over the edge. Smack. I need this scene framed. Julian literally comes back from the dead to beg for his ATM back, putting on a show of obsessive devotion. But the second his secret family threatens his chances with Clara, he snaps. He backhands the son he supposedly loved enough to betray his wife for. This is the dark reality of a narcissist. They don't have loyalty to anyone. Julian didn't love Serena, and he didn't love Leo. He loved the image of himself they provided. The moment that image cost him his meal ticket, he turned feral. Clara sipping her water while Julian brawls with his mistress on a global live stream is peak cinema. She didn't ruin him, she just gave him enough rope to hang himself in front of 450,000 viewers. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed sharply across the patio. Leo stumbled backward, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. "You little bastard," Julian screamed, his voice cracking, completely losing his mind. He pointed a shaking finger at the boy he had claimed to love more than anything. "Don't you ever speak to my wife like that? Your mother is the homewrecker. You are nothing but a mistake. Clara is the only woman I have ever loved." Serena let out a blood-curdling scream and launched herself at Julian. "You hit my son, you monster!" She clawed at his face, her nails tearing into his cheek. Julian cursed, violently shoving her backward into a tray. Wielding waiter, glass shattered across the expensive teak floor, champagne sprayed everywhere. It was a complete, degrading, animalistic brawl. I took a slow, elegant sip of my iced water. Silas chuckled softly, reaching over to pluck a rogue piece of shattered crystal off my table. "Such a volatile family dynamic!" Local gendarmes, alerted by the restaurant manager, rushed the terrace, grabbing Julian and Serena and pulling them apart. Julian was bleeding from his cheek, his expensive shirt torn, gasping for breath as an officer pinned his arms behind his back. "Clara!" Julian yelled over his shoulder as the police dragged him toward the exit, his eyes practically bugging out of his head. "Clara, you saw! I defended you. I don't care about them. I only care about you. Tell them to let me go." I finally stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress and walked slowly over to where the police were holding him. "You really think you proved something just now, don't you, Julian?" I asked, my voice a soft, lethal whisper. "I proved I choose you," he gasped desperately. I smiled, a cold razor, sharp curve of my lips. I reached over to the table and picked up Silas's phone, turning the screen around so Julian could see it. The viewer count was currently sitting at 450,000 and climbing rapidly. The chat feed was a blur of absolute disgust from his former investors, colleagues, and the general public. Julian's pupils dilated to the size of saucers. The breath completely left his lungs. "You didn't choose me, Julian," I whispered, stepping so close he could smell my perfume. "You just permanently, publicly destroyed your own resurrection. The whole world just watched a dead man beat a teenager and brawl with his mistress." I tapped the screen, ending the broadcast. "Take him away, officers. He is disturbing my lunch." Later that evening, the Caribbean dry season broke. A violent tropical storm rolled in, hammering the tin roofs and turning the streets into rivers. I sat in the plush living room of my rented villa, reading a book by the fireplace. The security intercom buzzed. It was the front gate. I walked over to the monitor, standing in the torrential downpour, clinging to the wrought iron gates of my villa, was Julian. He had been released with a warning and a hefty fine, but he had nowhere to go. His accounts were frozen. His reputation was incinerated. He was drenched, shivering, uncontrollably, looking like a drowned rat. "Clara," His voice came through the intercom speaker, distorted by the static and the heavy rain. "Clara, please. I have nothing. I am so sorry. I'll do anything. Please just open the gate." I picked up a thick manila envelope from the console table. I walked out the front door, stepping under the massive covered portico, safely out of the rain. Julian's face lit up with a pathetic, desperate hope as he saw me approach the gate. "Clara, I knew you wouldn't leave me out here. I knew you still cared. I didn't open the gate." I simply slid the manila envelope through the iron bars. It fell into his trembling, wet hands. "What is this?" he stammered, water pouring down his bruised face. "It's the final step to proving your devotion, Julian," I said, my voice echoing coldly over the sound of the rain. "If you truly want a clean slate, sign it." He didn't even hesitate, driven by pure, blind desperation. He ripped open the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of papers. He squinted through the rain at the bold heading on the first page. His hands began to shake violently, not from the cold, but from absolute terror. This is a divorce settlement," he choked out, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, his face twisting in agony. "Clara, it says I surrender all marital assets. It says I walk away with zero. Nothing. You are leaving me with nothing." "You are a dead man, Julian," I said, my eyes locking onto his with the finality of a closing coffin. "Dead men don't need bank accounts. Sign it. Or you can go back to Serena and starve." Julian stared at the papers, the rain washing away his tears, the crushing weight of his reality, finally bringing him to his knees in the mud. Julian's final, desperate gamble was a masterclass in pathetic delusion. 3 weeks after I left him kneeling in the Caribbean mud, he had somehow managed to crawl his way back to Manhattan. Utilizing the last shred of his incinerated social capital, he hijacked the steps of the Plaza Hotel, inviting every tabloid journalist and gossip vlogger who had covered his spectacular downfall. I watched his live feed from the tinted back seat of Silas's Maybach as we pulled up to the curb. Julian stood at a podium surrounded by microphones, wearing a suspiciously shiny rented suit. He looked 10 years older, the arrogant tech. Bro facade had eroded, leaving behind a hollow, frantic man. "I stand before you a flawed man," Julian declared to the flashing cameras, clutching a velvet ring box like a life preserver. "I made terrible, unforgivable mistakes, but I have faced death, and I have returned with one singular truth. Clara Sterling is my soulmate. I am here today to publicly beg for her forgiveness and to ask her to marry me again." He dropped to one knee on the concrete. The cameras pivoted instantly as Silas's driver opened my door. I stepped onto the pavement. The sea of reporters parted for me, a chorus of camera shutters echoing like gunfire. Julian's face lit up with a sickening, triumphant hope. He actually believed his public display of humiliation would force my hand, that my old ingrained habit of saving his reputation would kick in. "Clara," he gasped, holding out a diamond ring that looked aggressively cubic zirconia. "You came." "I did," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the murmur of the press. I didn't stop walking until I was looking down at him. I didn't look at the ring. I looked directly into his bloodshot, sunken eyes. "I told you I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Marry me, Clara. Let's rewrite our story." I offered him a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. Slowly, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a crisp, embossed piece of paper. "I am afraid that is legally impossible, Julian," I said, turning the paper so the cameras could catch the gold seal. "My marital status is no longer a widow. As of this morning, I am a newlywed." Silas stepped up seamlessly beside me, wrapping a possessive, heavy arm around my waist. The bespoke cut of his dark suit and the absolute predatory calm radiating from him made Julian look like a beggar kneeling in the dirt. The press erupted. Questions were shouted over one another in a chaotic frenzy. Julian froze. His extended hand began to shake violently. The micro-expressions of his total psychological collapse played out in real time. His pupils dilated so wide, his eyes looked black, his jaw went slack, and a terrifying, wet wheeze escaped his throat. "No," Julian choked out, the velvet box slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the concrete. "No, you can't. You are mine. I came back from the dead for you. You can't belong to him." He lunged upward, his hands reaching for my throat in a sudden, blind fit of madness. He never made it. A blood-curdling shriek ripped through the crowd. "You ruined us." Serena burst through the wall of reporters like a heat-seeking missile. She was unrecognizable, haggard, unhinged, her eyes rolling with a feral, starving madness. The crushing weight of the debt and the absolute destruction of her pampered life had finally broken her mind. Before Silas's security could even blink, Serena slammed into Julian. There was a sickening thud. Julian gasped, a sharp, choked sound. He stumbled backward, his hands flying to his stomach. Serena pulled her hand back, revealing a jagged, 6-inch hunting knife slick with crimson. "You promised me the world," Serena screamed, spitting in his face before the police violently tackled her to the pavement. "You promised me everything." Julian collapsed onto the hotel steps, blood rapidly pooling beneath him, staining his rented suit. The cameras went wild, capturing every agonizing second as he stared up at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocated fish. I looked down at him, my expression completely unchanged. I didn't scream. I didn't reach for him. I simply turned my back on his bleeding body and let Silas guide me back to the car. 3 days later, the smell of antiseptic stung my nose. Julian had survived the stabbing, but massive blood loss and brain hypoxia had left him permanently paralyzed from the neck down. He was trapped in a broken shell, kept alive by the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator in a sterile ICU room. I stood at the foot of his bed. When he heard my heels click against the linoleum, his eyes fluttered open. He couldn't speak, but the monitor beside his bed picked up his racing heart rate. The frantic, desperate pleading in his eyes was deafening. "Save me," his eyes screamed. "Forgive me." Silas stepped out of the shadows of the hospital room, holding a single thin file. "Your former husband is remarkably resilient." "Clara," Silas murmured, his baritone voice smooth as silk. He stepped up to the side of the bed, leaning over Julian. Or perhaps just exceptionally stubborn. Julian's eyes darted to Silas, burning with a helpless, impotent rage. "I thought you should have one last piece of your legacy before you go, Julian," Silas said softly. He opened the file and held the paper up so Julian's paralyzed head could read the bold black text. It was a DNA paternity report. "Serena was quite the opportunist in college," Silas explained, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "It turns out, while you were busy manipulating Clara, Serena was securing her own safety net. Leo isn't your son, Julian. He never was. You betrayed the only woman who ever loved you. You bankrupted your life, and you crossed the boundary of death to protect another man's bastard. Wrap me up and bury me, because this is the greatest plot twist in history. Julian's entire betrayal was built on the patriarchal ego trip of having a male heir, because Clara was sterile. He literally broke the laws of physics to save a legacy that wasn't even his. Silas, our literal cosmic king, delivers the news of the 0.00% match like he is reading a weather report. Julian didn't die from the stabbing. He died because his ego couldn't survive the truth. He was a cosmic joke. He threw away a woman who would tear the universe apart for him, all to be a glorified sugar daddy for another man's kid. If that isn't the most satisfying flatline in the history of medicine, I don't know what is. The monitors attached to Julian went completely berserk. His eyes bugged out of his head, staring at the 0.00% probability match on the paper. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Every lie, every cruel word he had spoken to me, every ounce of his stolen wealth, it had all been for absolutely nothing. He was a cosmic joke, his jaw locked. A single agonizing tear rolled down his cheek. Then, the frantic, jagged peaks on the heart monitor stuttered. The rhythmic beeping turned into a chaotic alarm, and finally degraded into one long, continuous, high-pitched tone. Flatline. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of my final, absolute victory. I felt no pity. I felt only the profound, cleansing silence of a slate wiped completely clean. "Let's go," I whispered. We walked out of the hospital, leaving the chaos of the crashing alarms behind us. As we stepped into the warm Manhattan night, Silas wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close against his chest. "You know," I murmured, staring up at the city lights. "The karmic guide hasn't spoken to me in my head since the day Julian's car crashed." Silas chuckled, a low, vibrating sound that sent a shiver down my spine. He stopped, turning me to face him, his dark eyes glinting with an ancient, terrifying devotion. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. "That's because the system interface is no longer required, Clara," he whispered. The voice wasn't spoken aloud. It echoed directly inside my mind, carrying that familiar, faint, static, laced hum. I gasped, my eyes widening as I looked up at him. Silas smiled, a devastatingly handsome, entirely human smile. "I told you," Silas said aloud, his thumb gently tracing my jawline. "I only punish unfaithful men, but for a woman who would tear the universe apart for love, I thought it was time to step out of the code and experience it myself." A slow, brilliant smile spread across my face. I grabbed the lapels of his suit and pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like vengeance, freedom, and a forever that I finally controlled. "Take me home, guide," I whispered against his lips. "Anywhere you want, my queen," he replied. "I only punish unfaithful men, but for a woman who would tear the universe apart for love, I thought it was time to step out of the code and experience it myself." Ladies, we need to talk about that ending, because underneath the billionaire revenge and the paternity tests, this story hits a nerve that most of us try to ignore. How many of us have been the Clara in someone's life? You know the role. You're the one who fixes the messes, the one who pays the bills, the one who stays up until 3 a.m. worrying while he's out, clearing his head red in someone else's bed. We stay because we think our love is a shield. We think if we just pour enough of our vitality, our money, and our youth into them, they'll finally become the men we deserve. But Julian Sterling is the ultimate proof that you cannot fix a hollow man. He was a bottomless pit of entitlement. He didn't just want Clara's love. He wanted her erasure. He wanted her to be the silent engine that kept his life running while he played hero in another woman's story. The moment Clara stopped being a necessity and started being a sovereign human being, Julian's entire world turned to ash. That's the secret, loves. Toxic men don't actually have power. They have borrowed strength. They are the moon, and the second you stop shining on them, they disappear into the dark. And can we talk about Silas for a second? The guide. The literal system interface that watched Clara's suffering for a decade and said, "Actually, I'm obsessed with her." That is the energy we are manifesting for 2027. We are done saving the Julians of the world. We are waiting for the partner who sees our strength, respects our boundaries, and helps us drop the mistress's will into the fireplace. Julian's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a correction. He was an anomaly in a universe that finally demanded payment. And Clara, she didn't just get her money back, she got her soul back. So talk to me in the comments, and don't hold back. Have you ever been the stepping stone for a man who claimed he was too weak or too stressed to treat you right, only to find out he had plenty of energy for someone else? And I want to know, if a guide appeared in your mind today and offered you a chance to terminate your current karmic pact with a toxic person, would you do it? Or are you still hoping they'll change? Be honest, we've all been there, and this is a safe space to vent. Drop your stories below. I read every single one. Stay ruthless, protect your trust fund, and I'll see you in the next one.